My name is Pierce. For 25 years, I was more than just the head luthier at Vance Guitars. I was its memory, its hands, its soul. My job wasn't just to build instruments, it was to build legacies, to translate the spirit of our founder Arthur Vance from a whisper in the wood into a roar from an amplifier. But legacies don't show up on a balance sheet. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. If you've ever poured your entire life into something only to be told you're no longer a necessary expense, then you know a little bit of what this feels like. Stick around because this isn't just a story about getting fired. It's a story about what happens when the people who only speak the language of money forget that true value is something you can't digitize. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about when the system gets a long overdue reality check. The day it all ended started like any other. The morning air in my workshop still held the ghosts of last night's work. The sweet, spicy scent of rosewood dust, the sharp tang of shellac, and the faint, almost metallic smell of heated steel from fretwork. It was a perfume I'd worn for a quarter of a century. My hands, calloused and mapped with the fine lines of 1,000 tiny cuts, moved with an economy that only comes from repetition. They knew the curve of a guitar's waist better than they knew the lines on my own face. I was in the middle of carving the bracing for a V28 Dreadnought, a signature model. My thumb pressed into the Sitka spruce, feeling for the precise point where the wood would yield the most resonance without sacrificing integrity. It wasn't a science, it was a conversation. It wasn't a science, it was a conversation. That's when the email came. A sterile subject line only summons. Meeting 10 a.m. Conference room 3. It was from Melody's assistant, Melody Vance, Arthur's granddaughter. She'd inherited the company a year ago, not through a passion for music or craftsmanship, but through the cold mechanics of a trust fund and the polished confidence of an MBA. She saw Vance Guitars not as a hallowed institution, but as an underperforming asset. She walked the halls of the workshop like an investor touring a factory farm, her eyes scanning for inefficiencies, not artistry. She couldn't tell the difference between Brazilian rosewood and Indian laurel, but she could tell you the precise cost per unit down to the tenth of a cent. I wiped the sawdust from my hands onto my leather apron, a silent protest against the corporate sterility I was about to enter. Conference room 3 was on the executive floor, a place I'd only ever been to for Christmas parties and to receive my 20-year service pin from Arthur himself. The room was all glass and brushed steel, cold and impersonal. Melody was sitting at the head of a long black table, a laptop open in front of her. A man in a suit I didn't recognize, presumably from HR, sat beside her, his posture rigid, his face a neutral mask. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Melody's voice was as crisp and devoid of warmth as the room itself. She began by talking about the future, about modernization, about leveraging new technologies to achieve unprecedented levels of precision and consistency. She used words like synergy and optimization. It was a speech she'd probably practiced in front of a mirror, a eulogy for a way of life she had never bothered to understand. And then came the blade. As part of this strategic realignment, she explained, my role as head luthier was being made redundant. Redundant. 25 years of my life, the lifeblood of this company, reduced to a line item that was no longer required. She said they were transitioning to a fully automated system. A team of engineers would now oversee a fleet of CNC machines, capable of producing guitar bodies and necks with a tolerance of 1,000th of an inch. Perfect, flawless, identical, soulless. I just looked at her. I didn't rage. I didn't plead. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. In that moment, I saw her not as the powerful new CEO, but as a child playing with a priceless watch. She didn't know how to wind. She mistook my silence for shock, for defeat. Her expression softened into a practiced, condescending sympathy. She said she understood this was difficult, that my service was appreciated, and that the company had prepared a generous severance package. The HR man slid a folder across the table. I didn't even look at it. I just nodded slowly. I understand, I said. My voice was even, quiet. It seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The thought formed in my mind, clear as a bell. She gestured for me to take the folder. I didn't. Instead, I stood up. "Thank you for your time," I said, and turned to leave. The HR man cleared his throat, stammering something about needing me to sign the documents, that security would escort me to my workshop to collect my personal effects. I just kept walking. They didn't understand. They thought my value was in my labor, in the hours I clocked. They didn't know that my real value to Vance Guitars was a secret, a legacy I'd built in parallel with every instrument that had ever left my shop. For every 100 guitars I made, for every masterpiece that ended up in the hands of a legend, I had introduced a tiny, unique, and harmless flaw. It was a signature, a maker's mark hidden in plain sight, a specific pattern in the wood grain of the heel block, a minute asymmetry in the hand-cut mother-of-pearl inlay on the 12th fret, a particular scroll work on the internal bracing that only another luthier, or a truly dedicated player, would ever know to look for. It wasn't a mistake. It was a fingerprint. It was the mark of a human hand. It was the soul and the world's top musicians, the very people Melody was hoping to court with her new line of perfect guitars. They knew about it. They looked for it. It was the secret handshake that proved they held a true Vance, a guitar made by Pete. Melody was planning a grand unveiling at the NAMM show, the biggest industry trade show of the year, just 1 month away. She would stand on a stage under bright lights, holding her flawless, soulless creation, and declare it the future. What she didn't know was that the very experts in the front row, the rock stars and session legends whose endorsements she craved, would be the first to look for my signature. And when they couldn't find it, they wouldn't see perfection. They would see a forgery. The drive home was a blur. The familiar roads of the small town that had been my home since I'd started as an apprentice felt alien, the landscape distorted through a film of disbelief. I pulled into my driveway, the engine of my old truck rumbling to a stop, and just sat there in the silence, the keys still in the ignition. The quiet was deafening. For 25 years my days had been filled with the sounds of creation, the rasp of a file on bone, the gentle tap of a fretting hammer, the soaring resonant test chord of a newly strung guitar. Now there was only the dull thrum of my own blood in my ear. I finally went inside, the house feeling too big, too empty. My wife Sarah was at work and my son Ben was away at college. I walked straight to the small den I used as a home office. On the wall hung a single, unadorned guitar. It wasn't flashy. It was a simple, OM-style acoustic, with a cedar top and mahogany back and sides. It was the first guitar I ever built under the tutelage of Arthur Vance. He had guided my hands, his own gnarled fingers, smelling of pipe tobacco and wood glue, resting gently on mine as I learned to chisel the dovetail joint. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience. He taught me that the wood tells you what it wants to be. You just have to be quiet enough to listen. I took the guitar off the wall. The finish was worn in places where my arm had rested over the years. The frets grooved from countless hours of playing. It wasn't perfect. It had a dozen little flaws, the honest mistakes of a young man learning his craft. But it had a voice. It had a soul. I sat down in my worn leather chair, the guitar across my lap, and the dam finally broke. It wasn't a loud theatrical breakdown. It was a quiet, crushing weight. A quarter-century of loyalty, of pride, of identity, had been deleted with a click of a mouse and a pre-rehearsed speech. I wasn't just an employee. I was a guardian. Arthur had made me a promise on his deathbed. I remembered that day with a clarity that felt like a fresh wound. He was in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic, a harsh contrast to the earthy scents I associated with him. The once strong hands that could coax a symphony from a block of wood were frail, translucent. He'd pulled me close, his voice a dry rasp. "Pierce," he'd whispered, "don't let them turn it into a factory. The soul is in the hands, not the machines.
promise me you'll protect it. And I had. I'd promised him. I had stayed on after he was gone, tolerated the board members who saw his passion as a quaint eccentricity, and tried to shield the workshop from the creeping tide of corporate metrics. I thought my role as head luthier, my connection to the artists, my encyclopedic knowledge of our history, made me indispensable. I thought I was honoring my promise by simply being there, a bulwark against the soulless efficiency that people like Melody represented. Now sitting in my den, I felt like I had failed him. My quiet stewardship hadn't been enough. I had been a frog in a slowly boiling pot, and Melody had just cranked the heat to full. The severance folder was still on the table, in that conference room. I hadn't even looked at it. I could guess what it contained. A few months' pay, a non-disclosure agreement designed to gag me, and probably a non-compete clause so absurdly broad it would prevent me from so much as whittling a stick in my own backyard. They likely figured I was a simple craftsman, close to retirement age, who would take the money and fade away quietly. Maybe they assumed my pension would be enough to keep me comfortable. The irony was, I was 3 years shy of full vesting, another perfectly calculated cost-saving measure, I was sure. I ran my thumb over the worn spruce top of that first guitar. The anger began to burn through the grief, a cold, clean flame. This wasn't just about my job. It was about my promise to Arthur. It was about the very definition of what made a Vance guitar a Vance. Melody thought she had cut out a line item. What she had actually done was hand me the one weapon that could undo her entire strategy. She wanted to build a brand on a legacy of authenticity, while simultaneously destroying the very source of it. It was a paradox, so arrogant, so breathtakingly stupid, that it could only have been conceived in a business school classroom. My resolve began to harden. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional battle. That's what they'd expect. A wrongful termination lawsuit that would get tied up in court for years, costing me a fortune I didn't have, and would ultimately be forgotten. No, my revenge would be quiet, elegant, and devastating. It would be a lesson taught not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, officiated by the very high priests of the industry she was so desperate to impress. My plan wouldn't be to destroy Vance Guitars. It would be to save it from her. I would expose her modernized line for what it was, a collection of high-tech counterfeits.
The catalyst came later that evening. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I knew by heart. It was Jax Ryder, a guitarist whose name was synonymous with blues rock royalty. He'd played Vance guitars for 30 years. I'd personally built his last 5. The text was simple. Pierce, my friend, the V45 you made me last year is starting to sound downright heavenly. Got a crazy idea for a semi-hollow body. When can we talk? I stared at the screen. Jax didn't know. Of course he didn't. The news wouldn't be public. I felt a surge of something powerful. My value wasn't tied to a corporate email address or a title on a business card. It was in a text message from a legend. It was in the trust of the people who actually made the music. Melody had the company, the factory, the marketing budget. But I had the artists. I had the legacy. I had the secret. I took a deep breath and typed back, Jax, a lot has changed. I'm no longer with Vance, but I would love to talk about that semi-hollow. In fact, I have a story to tell you, and I think you'll want to hear it before the NAMM show. I hit send. The first gear had just clicked into place. My private breakdown was over. The phase of quiet, methodical resolve had begun. The phone buzzed again almost instantly. It was Jax. Call me, now. I smiled. The fallout was just beginning, but not for me. For Melody, she just didn't know it yet. The next month was a study in contrasts. Outwardly, my life became quiet. I spent my days in the garage, which I slowly began converting back into the small one-man workshop it had been before I ever went to work for Arthur. The familiar rituals were a balm to my soul. The scent of sawdust, the meticulous sharpening of my Japanese chisels, the simple, honest labor of it. I was rediscovering the joy of the craft, free from production quotas and quarterly reports. I wasn't just a manager of Luthiers anymore. I was a Luthier again. To anyone looking in, I was just another old-timer puttering around in his retirement. Inwardly, however, a complex and intricate plan was taking shape, piece by meticulous piece. My campaign wouldn't be waged with angry press releases or legal threats. It would be a campaign of whispers, of strategically planted seeds of doubt that would blossom into a full-blown crisis of confidence at the perfect moment. My first call after speaking with Jack's rider was to a young man named Leo. Leo was one of the last apprentices I had personally trained at Vance. He was a prodigy, with a feel for wood that you can't teach. He had a Luthier's soul. He was quiet, observant, and deeply respectful of the old ways. When Melody had taken over, she'd seen him as just another pair of hands on the factory floor, overlooking his immense talent. I knew he was disillusioned. He'd stayed on, mostly out of financial necessity, but his heart wasn't in it. He was my man on the inside. I called him that first night. I told him what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then a quiet, venomous curse. He knew what this meant. He knew what they were throwing away. He asked me what I was going to do. "I'm going to remind them what a real Vance guitar is," I said, "and I'm going to need your help." His role was simple but crucial: to be my eyes and ears. I needed to know everything about the new production line, not the corporate propaganda, but the ground truth. How were the CNC machines working? What was the mood among the few remaining craftsmen in the finishing and setup departments? What were the marketing materials going to claim? Leo agreed without a moment's hesitation. He saw it as his duty to the legacy we both cherished. It was a debatable choice for him, risking his job out of loyalty to a fired mentor, but I knew his character. He believed in the craft more than he believed in a paycheck from a company that had lost its way. The second piece of the plan involved formalizing the secret itself. For 25 years, the signature flaw had been an informal, organic thing, a piece of institutional knowledge passed down through touch and feel. Now I needed to codify it. I spent a week documenting everything. I took high-resolution photographs of the bracing patterns on my old guitars. I used a digital caliper and a jeweler's loupe to measure the exact minute imperfections in the inlays I had hand-cut. I wrote detailed descriptions of the specific way I finished the inside of the body, a process that left a unique, almost invisible texture that the mass-produced spray-finished interiors of the CNC guitars would never have. I compiled all of this into a single password-protected digital file. I called it the Vance Authenticity Guide. This wasn't just a collection of trivia, it was a forensic blueprint. It was irrefutable proof, understandable to any expert of what separated my work, the company's entire legacy of work, from Melody's high-tech replicas. The third and perhaps most critical piece was the activation of my network. This was where my 25 years of building relationships, not just guitars, would pay off. I wasn't just a supplier to these world-famous musicians. In many cases, I was a friend, a confidant, a collaborator. They would call me at all hours, not to talk business, but to talk tone. They'd tell me about how a guitar I built for them had opened up on the road, how it had become an extension of their own voice. This was a bond Melody, with her spreadsheets and MBA jargon, could never comprehend. My call with Jack's rider had been illuminating. He was furious, not just for me, but for what it represented. He said, "Pierce, those guitars aren't just wood and wire. They're part of my sound. They're part of me. If that soul is gone, the brand is nothing but a name on a headstock." He became my first and most powerful ally. I then made a list of 5 other people. It included 2 other legendary guitarists, both of whom had multi-decade endorsement deals with Vance. It included a woman named Catherine Reed, the editor-in-chief of Vintage Guitar magazine, the most respected publication in the industry. and it included a man named Marcus Thorne, a notoriously cantankerous but brilliant vintage guitar dealer from Nashville, a man who could spot a refinished 1959 Les Paul from 50 paces. These people were the arbiters of taste and authenticity in our world. Their collective opinion could make or break a brand overnight. I didn't send them a mass email. I contacted each one personally. To the musicians, I sent a simple cryptic message, similar to the one I sent Jax. Big changes advance. Before you see the new line at NAMM, there's something you need to know about the old ones. The secret is in the details. Bring a good light. To Catherine Reed and Marcus Thorne, I was slightly more direct. I told them I had a story about the true legacy of Vance guitar. A story that would redefine the way collectors and players looked at the company's entire post-1996 output. I told them I had prepared a guide, a key to unlock that legacy, and I would share it with them exclusively. 24 hours before the NAMM unveiling, the responses were immediate, and exactly as I'd hoped. Curiosity, intrigue, and a healthy dose of suspicion towards any modernization of a beloved brand. They all agreed to my terms. The trap was being set, not with malice, but with a craftsman's precision. Meanwhile, Leo's reports from inside the factory painted a grim picture. The CNC machines were churning out bodies and necks with terrifying efficiency. They were perfect, too perfect. The few old hands left in the sanding and finishing departments were miserable. They were no longer artisans. They were cogs in an assembly line. One of them, a man named Sal, who had been finishing guitars for 40 years, told Leo that the new bodies felt dead. He said, "You can sand them smooth as glass. You can lay a finish on them that looks a mile deep, but there's no life in them. It's like putting a tuxedo on a mannequin." Leo also confirmed that Melody's marketing team was going all in on the perfection angle. Their tagline for the launch, which he'd seen on a leaked memo, was Vance, perfected. They were planning to have a display at the NAMM booth, showing laser scans of the old hand-carved bodies versus the new, CNC milled ones, highlighting the flaws of the old way and the precision of the new. They were going to turn my life's work, the very soul I'd imbued into the instruments, into a marketing gimmick, to showcase their own supposed superiority. They were literally planning to advertise their own forgery without even realizing it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a saw. The final part of my plan was to consult a lawyer, not to sue, but to protect myself. I found a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in intellectual property and trade practices. I laid out the whole story, the firing, the promise to Arthur, the signature flaws in my plan for the NAMM show. He listened intently, a slight smile playing on his lips. He told me my position was unique and powerful. The flaws were not a registered trademark, but they constituted a de facto mark of authenticity, established over decades and recognized by experts in the field. My plan wasn't libel or slander, because I would only be telling the truth. I wouldn't be saying Melody's guitars were bad. I would be providing a method for experts to determine that they were not, by a long-established standard. The same product. The company had built its brand reputation on my work, and now they were selling something different under the same name. It wasn't illegal, but it was a house of cards. He advised me to frame everything carefully. I wasn't an accuser. I was an educator. I was simply sharing the secret history of the brand with the people who cared most. With the legal green light, the final piece was in place. My secret, once a quiet pact between me and the wood, was now a documented, verifiable system. My allies, the most respected voices in the industry, were primed and waiting. My insider was feeding me critical intelligence. All I had to do was wait for Melody to walk onto that stage, bask in the glow of the spotlights, and hand the world the evidence of her own deception. I went back to my workshop, picked up a block of Brazilian rosewood that I'd been saving for years, and began to design the first guitar of my new life, a semi-hollow for Jack's rider. The week before the NAMM show,
The industry buzz was at a fever pitch. Melody's marketing machine was in overdrive. Glossy, full-page ads started appearing in all the major guitar magazines. They featured sleek, artfully lit photos of the new Aura model, the flagship of her modernized line. The headlines were bold, arrogant, the end of compromise, precision, passion, perfection, the soul of a Vance, the mind of a machine. That last one almost made me laugh out loud. Leo was my lifeline. He'd call me from his car during his lunch break, his voice a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. The atmosphere inside the factory was tense. The corporate team was ecstatic, high on their own supply of marketing jargon and projected sales figures. But the few remaining craftsmen on the floor were like ghosts. They knew, they could feel the hollowness of the new instruments. Sal, the old finisher, had apparently tried to raise a concern with a production manager, saying the new poly-based finish wasn't curing the same way on the machine-cut wood. He was told, "Your job is to meet the quota, Sal, not to have an opinion." Sal put in his 2 weeks' notice the next day, another piece of the company's soul walking out the door. My first move was as quiet as a chisel shaving a piece of cedar. It was time to deliver the Vance Authenticity Guide. I sent a simple password-protected link to Catherine Reed at Vintage Guitar Magazine and Marcus Thorne, the dealer in Nashville. My email was brief, as promised. The key to a 25-year-old secret. I believe your readers and your clients will find this illuminating. The password is Arthur's Promise. I specified that they could share it with Jax Ryder and the other 2 musicians on my list, but with no one else, until after Melody's presentation. The silence that followed was more potent than any declaration of war. I knew what was happening. I could picture Catherine Reed, a woman who had dedicated her life to the history of these instruments, leaning forward, her screen illuminated by my detailed photos and descriptions. I could see Marcus Thorne, a man who trusted his hands and eyes above all else, cross-referencing my guide with the vintage Vance guitars he had in his own inventory. They weren't just reading a document, they were receiving a revelation. They were learning a secret language they didn't even know existed. The panic started 2 days before the show. It wasn't on Melody's floor, it was in the executive suites of her biggest endorsers. My first confirmation came from Jax Ryder. He called me, his voice electric. "Pierce, you magnificent bastard. I've been playing these things for 30 years and I never knew. I felt it, but I never knew. I just pulled out my 78 acoustic, the one Arthur gave me, and it's there. The little scroll on the X bracing, it's there. Then I checked the V45 you built me, the inlay on the 12th fret. My God, you've been signing your name on the inside this whole time." I told him that was Arthur's way. The signature isn't for the crowd, it's for the player. Jax understood immediately. He then told me he'd had a very interesting call with his artist relations manager at Vance. He'd simply asked, as a longtime partner, if he could get a pre-show look at the schematics for the new Aura model, specifically the internal bracing, a reasonable request for a signature artist. The request caused a small flurry of confusion. The marketing people didn't have them. The engineers had CAD files, but they didn't show the kind of detail Jax was asking for. Melody herself apparently got on the phone. Jax said she was perfectly polite, but evasive. She assured him the new bracing was a proprietary algorithmically optimized design that provided unparalleled stability and projection. Jax just asked a simple question, "But does it have the scroll, Melody?" He said there was a dead silence on the other end of the line. She had no idea what he was talking about. She asked him to clarify. He just said, "Never mind, I guess I'll see it at the show." He hung up. The seed was planted. A similar story played out with my other 2 key artist allies. They made quiet, polite, but surgically precise inquiries to their own contacts at Vance, asking about tiny specific details for Mike. Each time they were met with confused silence or dismissive corporate speak. The artist relations department, which used to be run by people who lived and breathed guitars, was now staffed by young marketing grads who only knew the talking points from a sales deck. They couldn't answer the questions because they didn't even understand them. Leo's report that evening was gold. He said a wave of low-grade panic was rippling through the executive wing. Melody had apparently called an emergency meeting. She was demanding to know what this scroll was that Jack's writer kept asking about. She was asking why three of their biggest artists were suddenly making strange technical inquiries about inlay imperfections and the grain pattern on heel blocks. Nobody had an answer. They pulled the old paper blueprints from the archives, the ones Arthur and I had drawn by hand decades ago. They were just technical drawings. The secret wasn't in the plans, it was in the execution. It was knowledge that had resided in my hands. The paranoia was setting in. Melody's team started to suspect an industrial espionage plot from a competitor. They couldn't conceive that the threat was coming from the history they had so casually discarded. They were looking for a rival corporation, not a ghost in their own machine. The day before the launch, the final silent checkmate was placed on the board. Catherine Reed sent me a one-line email, an astonishing story, Pierce. We are holding our cover. We'll be in the front row tomorrow. Marcus Thorne was more direct. He forwarded me an email chain. It was between him and Vance's head of sales. Marcus had offered to purchase the entire first run of the Aura line for his dealership network, a multi-million-dollar deal. There was just one condition. He required a certificate of authenticity for each guitar personally signed by the head luthier, verifying that it met the traditional construction standards of a company, including the luthier's marks as detailed in his confidential brief. The sales director, smelling a huge commission, enthusiastically agreed, promising to get right on it. His follow-up email, at the bottom of the chain, was panicked. Marcus, regarding your request, I'm having trouble tracking down the specific marks you're referring to. Regarding your request, I'm having trouble tracking down the specific marks you're referring to. Our new process is standardized for perfection. Can you clarify what you mean? Marcus's final reply was a masterstroke of understated destruction. If you don't know what they are, then you aren't selling what I'm buying. Offer withdrawn.
Melody was now flying blind into a hurricane of her own making. Her top endorsers were suspicious. Her most powerful potential dealer had just backed out of a massive deal for reasons she couldn't comprehend, and the most influential journalist in the industry was sitting on a story that could dismantle her entire brand identity. She was about to step onto that stage and present her perfect guitar, completely unaware that the jury had already reached a verdict. The day of the NAMM show arrived, shimmering with the artificial light and electric hum of the Anaheim Convention Center. This was the cathedral of the music gear industry, a place of pilgrimage for musicians and builders from all over the world. Vance Guitars had one of the largest booths, a prime piece of real estate right in the center of the main hall. It was a testament to their legacy, a legacy Melody was about to set on fire. I wasn't there, of course. My presence would have been a distraction. My part in the play was over. I was now just a member of the audience watching from afar. Leo was there, though, blending into the crowd, a small, almost invisible smile on his face. He was my live feed, sending me text updates. At 2 p.m. sharp, the lights at the Vance booth dimmed, and a single dramatic spotlight hit the small stage. Melody walked into the light, holding the new Aura model. It gleamed under the lights, its finish like a pool of black ink. It was, by all accounts, a stunningly beautiful object. From his vantage point, Leo texted me, "She's on." Crowd is huge. Jax, Catherine, Marcus, all in the front row. They look like judges at a hanging. Melody began her speech. It was the same polished, soulless rhetoric from her corporate announcements. She talked about honoring the past while embracing the future. She spoke of how the Aura represented the culmination of Arthur Vance's vision, now perfected by technology. She even had the audacity to put up a slide with a quote from her grandfather: "The search for the perfect tone is a luthier's life's work." She was using his words to justify the eradication of everything he stood for. Then came the moment of truth. She finished her speech to a round of polite, expectant applause. And now she announced, her voice swelling with pride, "I'd like to invite a few true legends and experts up on stage to be the first to experience the future." She gestured to the front row. "Jack's Ryder, Catherine Reed, Marcus Thorne, please join me." A hush fell over the crowd as the three of them made their way to the stage. This was the ultimate endorsement, the passing of the torch. Or so she thought. Leo's texts came in a rapid-fire burst. They're on stage. Melody is beaming. She hands the guitar to Jax first. Jax took the guitar. He didn't plug it in. He just held it, turning it over in his hands. He ran his hand along the neck, his expression unreadable. He strummed a single, open chord. The sound was clear, loud, balanced. It was a technically good sound, but it wasn't a Vance sound. It lacked the warmth, the complex overtones, the bloom that came from hand-tuned bracing. It was the difference between a photograph of a fire and a real fire. Then, just as I knew he would, Jax reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, powerful jeweler's loop. The crowd murmured. This wasn't standard practice. Melody's smile faltered for the first time. She looked confused. Jax ignored her. He angled the guitar under the spotlight and peered intently at the mother-of-pearl inlay on the 12th fret. He held it there for a long moment, then moved the loop to the heel of the neck, examining the point where it joined the body. He lowered the loop, his face a mask of disappointment. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Catherine Reed and gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Catherine stepped forward. She took the guitar from him and performed her own quiet inspection, focusing on the fee holes, trying to see the interior. Marcus Thorne did the same, his expert hands tapping the spruce top, listening for a resonance that wasn't there. The silence on the stage stretched for an eternity. The atmosphere in the booth had shifted from excitement to a tense, awkward confusion. Melody finally broke the silence, her voice a little too bright. "Incredible, isn't it? The consistency we can achieve." It was Catherine Reed who spoke, her voice calm but carrying the full weight of her authority as the industry's foremost journalist. "It's a remarkable piece of engineering, Miss Vance," she said, choosing her words with surgical care. "Craftsmanship is flawless." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "But I have a question. We've spent the last day reviewing a comprehensive history of your company's post-1990s construction, provided by Pierce, your former head luthier. I was inerte. According to his detailed records, every premier instrument made in the last 25 years bears a series of unique handcrafted luthier. They are in effect the signature of the artist, the proof of authenticity. We can't seem to find any of them on this instrument." The word Pierce hit Melody like a physical blow. You could see the color drain from her face. The name she had dismissed as a redundant expense was now being spoken on her stage, at her moment of triumph, as the ultimate authority. The crowd began to buzz, the whispers spreading like wildfire. "A directius," Melody stammered, trying to recover. "Pierce, Mr. Pierce is a disgruntled former. This is some kind of sabotage. Those marks he's talking about, they were flaws, they were inconsistencies we've worked tirelessly to engineer out of the system. We've made the guitars perfect." Marcus Thorne, who had been silent until now, let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a brutal sound. "Ma'am," he said, his Nashville drawl cutting through the tension. "You don't get it. You didn't engineer out the flaws. You engineered out the soul. Those little flaws are how we know it's real. They're the reason a 1998 Vance is worth 3 times what a 2018 model is. You haven't perfected a Vance guitar. You've made a high-quality Chinese knockoff with your own logo on it. That was it. The kill shot. Delivered not by me but by the unimpeachable voice of the market itself."
Jack's rider handed the aura back to the stunned Melody, as if it were contaminated. He walked to the edge of the stage, took the microphone and said, "I've been proud to play Vance guitars my whole career, because I knew they were made with hands and a heart by my friend Pierce. This new thing,
it's a fine guitar for a beginner maybe, but the legacy of Vance, the one I signed on for, that legacy walked out the door last month. The exodus was immediate. It wasn't just the artists on stage, it was the culture. The story ripped through the NAMM show in minutes. Every dealer, every player, every journalist was now talking about the secret marks and how the new Vance line didn't have them. The booth, once a hub of excitement, became a pariah. People walked by, pointing and whispering. Melody's perfect guitars were now symbols of inauthenticity. She had spent a fortune to launch a product that was now publicly branded as a counterfeit. The power had shifted. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, collective realization. My hands were clean. I hadn't slandered her product. I had simply taught the world how to read the language she had tried to erase. The fallout from the NAMM show was a slow, beautiful train wreck. Catherine Reed's article in Vintage Guitar magazine came out a week later. The cover was a stark, close-up shot of the hand-carved scrollwork on the bracing inside one of my guitars with the headline "The Soul in the Machine, the Secret History of Vance Guitars and the Mark of a Master." The article itself was a masterpiece of journalism. It wasn't a hit piece. It was a love letter to craftsmanship. It detailed my 25-year history, my relationship with Arthur, and the philosophy behind the Luthier's marks. It framed the story not as a corporate squabble, but as a cautionary tale about the difference between price and value. It never once called Melody's guitar. It just made it devastatingly clear that they were not and could never be true Vance guitars. The market did the rest. Dealers started canceling their pre-orders for the Aura line. The online forums, the nerve center of the global guitar community, were on fire with debate. Players were posting photos of their own Vance guitars, searching for the marks, sharing their findings. My Vance Authenticity Guide had been leaked, and it became a viral document. Owning a Pierce-era Vance became a badge of honor. The value of the guitars I had built skyrocketed overnight, while the brand-new perfect ones sat in warehouses, suddenly undesirable. Competence isn't cheap, but losing it can bankrupt you. Melody's desperate counter-manipulation was as clumsy as it was predictable. First came the cease and desist letter from a high-priced law firm, accusing me of trade libel and intellectual property theft. My lawyer sent back a one-page response. It pointed out that the marks were not registered IP of the Vance Corporation, and that telling the truth about a product's manufacturing process was not libel. We never heard from them again. Then came the phone call. I was in my workshop, planing the top for Jack's rider's semi-hollow when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered. It was Melody. Her voice was no longer crisp and confident. It was thin, frayed, laced with a venomous rage. She accused me of trying to destroy her family's company. She called me a bitter old man, a saboteur. I let her rant. I just listened. The sound of her panic a distant noise against the quiet satisfaction of my own work. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my voice calm and even. I didn't destroy anything, Melody. I just held up a mirror. You saw a legacy and decided it was an inefficiency to be eliminated. You can't build a brand on a history you don't understand or respect. I'll sue you into the ground, Pierce, she shrieked. I'll ruin you. You can't, I said simply, because I have nothing you can take. My reputation isn't based on a corporate logo. It's in the hands of the people who play my guitar. And you can't sue them for having an opinion. There was a moment of sputtering silence. Then the desperation kicked in. Her tone shifted. It was the most pathetic pivot I'd ever heard. What do you want, Pierce? She asked, her voice suddenly pleading. Money.
your old job back. I'll double your salary. I'll make you vice president of legacy products. We can put the flaws back in. I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. She still didn't get it. She thought it was a feature that could be added or removed. A line of code. You can't put it back in, Melody. I said softly. It was never a feature. It was a philosophy. It was a promise I made to your grandfather. A promise to protect the soul of his company. And in my own way I believe I've just done that. I could hear the sharp intake of her breath. I had turned her own grandfather, her own claim to legitimacy, into the final unanswerable checkmate. I'm starting my own shop, I continued. Pierce and Company, Luthier. Leo is joining me. Seth from the finishing department is too. Jack's Ryder has already commissioned our first guitar. I wish you the best of luck with your new product line. And with that, I hung up. The final vindication came about a month later. Not with a bang, but with a quiet press release. The board of directors at Vance Guitar, facing a catastrophic collapse in brand value and shareholder confidence, had voted to remove Melody Vance as CEO. The press release noted that the new owners planned to discontinue the oral line and would be re-evaluating the brand's core identity. They had bought a name, but the soul was gone. It now resided in a small two-car garage workshop, smelling of sawdust and shellac. My new workplace, my new reality, my new life doesn't have conference rooms or quarterly reports. My workshop is small, but it's all mine. The light streams in through the window, catching the fine dust that always hangs in the air. It smells of potential. It smells of cedar, spruce, and rosewood. Leo is here, working at a bench across from me. He's not an apprentice anymore, he's a partner. Sel comes in 3 days a week to do our finishing, and he hums old tunes while he works, happy as I've ever seen him. We don't have an assembly line. We have a build list. It's already 2 years long. We're not building hundreds of guitars. We'll be lucky to build 20 in a year. But each one will be a testament to the craft. Each one will have a soul. Each one will have our mark, not hidden as a secret, but celebrated as a signature. The first Pierce and Company guitar, Jack's Ryder semi-hollow, now sings on stages around the world. Every time I see a picture of him playing it, I feel a quiet sense of rightness, of a promise kept. The company I gave my life to might be gone. Its name just another asset on a stranger's balance sheet. But the legacy of Arthur Vance is alive and well, right here in my hands. So what's the moral of the story? I guess it's that true value can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. It's not in the perfection of a machine, but in the heart and hands of a craftsman. It's a lesson that so many people in corner offices seem to forget. They get so obsessed with cutting costs and maximizing efficiency that they trim away the very thing that makes their product, their company, their brand special. They think competence is just an expense on a ledger, something to be optimized or outsourced. But competence isn't cheap until you lose it. And when you lose it, you find out it was the most valuable asset you ever had. For anyone out there who has ever felt undervalued, who has poured their heart into their work only to be told that they are redundant, remember that your worth is not defined by their title for you. Your value is in what you can do, what you know, and the relationships you've built. They can take your job, but they can't take your they can't take your integrity, and they can't take your soul. Sometimes being pushed out is the best thing that can happen. It forces you to build your own door, one they can never close again. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you liked this video and leave a comment below. I read all of them. Share this with anyone who needs to hear it, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories of vindication. Until next time, remember to value the work of your own hands.